things got bad, and the Fed opened up this facility, but Bitcoin ripped, right? Because they came in with extreme firepower and ripped. And I guess from Balaji's point of view, he's saying that like maybe like that credit facilities like this could kind of become like a very negative feedback loop where like if inflation expectations rise more, then maybe those long duration bonds sell off more, and then they have to borrow more money from the future through these credit facilities, and then bonds sell off even more, and then there's more and more money being created potentially. I don't know. What do you guys think about his pretty crazy hyperinflation call?
I mean, I thought it was kind of hilarious. I don't know if I necessarily agree with the 1 million Bitcoin as much as I want to, but I don't really have like a ton of thoughts on it. I think it's kind of crazy a little bit. I think the 2020s could end up becoming a decade defined by inflation. I think that's certainly possible, and that's something that we've already seen to an extent. But that's if the Fed's policy isn't going to be enough to cause deflation, right? And as Caleb was talking about earlier, we've already seen disinflation, but that's a lot different than deflation. Deflation is what you see during a recession where prices are falling. Disinflation is where the level of inflation or the inflation growth rate is beginning to decline. So we're still seeing prices rise. When you have a positive CPI value, that means prices are still rising year over year, but because we're seeing a slow in the growth rate, it just means that prices are rising less than they were last month in comparison to last year. So we're seeing disinflation. We're not yet seeing deflation. I think it's something that is very possible that we could see. Like if you look at monetary supply growth rates, right? If you look at M1 or M2 year over year growth rate, we're dipped down into the negatives at the lowest level that we've seen in a long time, since at least the 70s when the data I'm looking at, started. So that can have a massive effect on the market, and historically speaking does have a massive effect on the market. When the amount of monetary liquidity in the system is declining, you're going to see less demand for assets, both financial assets and gasoline at the pump or eggs at the store or whatever it is, and it creates this snowballing effect of falling prices equals lower revenue numbers, which equals I need to fire employees, and falling real estate prices, and all these things combine together to result in what we call a recession, or the declining phase of the short-term debt cycle, or however you want to phrase it. That the outcome is the same, and it's a decline in economic activity. So the question is the Fed's tightening cycle, or this period where financial conditions are severely tight, historically speaking, is that going to be enough to drive prices, or is the supply side issues and the result of fiscal stimulus in 2020 and 2021 and 0% interest rates throughout most of 2020 and 2021, is that going to outweigh what's going on currently today? Of course, I don't know, but I think that the deflation is just as much of a concern, if not more of a concern, than the inflation is.
That was a super, super great run through. I think I did see, I mean, at this point, everyone's seen Balaji's, thread and his outlook and the bet of 1 million Bitcoin in 90 days. I think we'd have much bigger problems on our hands if that actually came to fruition, right? So in a way, like, first of all, I don't own nearly enough Bitcoin for that to really pay out for me. And second of all, we probably have much bigger problems on our hands. So, I'm hoping that prediction doesn't come true in 90 days, but maybe over the next, 3, 5, 10 years, 100%. I think, I listened to some of the podcasts that he's been on where he talked a little bit about this like hyperinflationary outlook. And for me, I have a really hard time getting on board with the hyperinflationary viewpoint right now, because I think fundamentally my view is that Fed stimulus and QE and an increase in their balance sheet, is kind of the first stage of setting up for an inflationary cycle. But in order to actually have inflation materialize, you also need two other components after that, which is fiscal stimulus and lending activity, right? And so, if, like Peter Schiff, why did so many people get the inflationary call wrong after the great financial crisis? Because they were only focused on the monetary stimulus. But for right or for wrong, Barack Obama did not have monetary fiscal stimulus, right? He increased regulations, he increased taxes, corporate profits weren't accelerating at the pace that they were prior. And so we didn't get the follow through in fiscal stimulus. The second part of that is, or technically the third part is, we also didn't get an increase in lending activity after the great financial crisis. Banks were licking their wounds and they were very hesitant to extend their balance sheet. Let's contrast that with what happened in 2020. It was the exact opposite. We had an even larger monetary bazooka that was launched, the greatest fiscal spending basically since World War II, and we had a massive increase in lending activity. We hadn't seen loans and leases grow at this pace in decades. Commercial and industrial loans growing extremely fast. Consumer loans growing extremely fast. And so we had this multifaceted approach of all of these dynamics taking place. And so from my perspective, even if this, BTFP thing gets really out of hand and usage really picks up and the Fed's balance sheet really starts to go vertical here, we might get some of that follow through in fiscal stimulus. I don't think we've necessarily seen it yet. And if that BTFP is increasing because of banking risks, banks aren't going to be extending their balance sheet when they're, hunting for deposits to, pay people out. So I don't think we'd get the follow through in loans and leases that we would need for the actual inflationary cycle to come through. We might get it on the fiscal side. That's, debatable, but I certainly don't believe that we would get it in the actual loans side of things, right? We wouldn't get it in lending activity. And so because when the Fed conducts QE, they're essentially providing banks with a reserve asset. That's not actually like the money printer, going burr, so to speak, right? And the banks need to lend out against those reserves essentially in order for the money to enter the real economy. So this is why, from my perspective, QE only benefits, we get financial inflation. We don't necessarily get consumer goods inflation if it's just QE. And so I think the conversation would really need to be focused around these other aspects around fiscal stimulus and lending activity in order to actually predict if we're going into a hyperinflationary period.